What I really want to talk with you about is whether the small residential liberal arts college is a viable entity. There's an entire world of discourse that I think everybody's familiar with that's arisen about the sustainability and vitality of the liberal arts model. Everybody in the room knows about the cost problem, right? So this is a whole set of linked factors that together have caused tuition pricing to rise at every school in the nation. That trend is likely to continue. Think of just a few of the factors. Demographics indicate that there will be fewer college-bound students. That's a trend, downward trend, that's going to continue until 2017 and then stay essentially flat for more than a decade. The slower than preferable recovery of our economy means that many families are not seeing significant or real income growth, and so saving for college is harder than ever. Colleges themselves are engaged in a sort of amenities arms race that seeks to provide a physical plant that's just enough better to attract students that otherwise might go elsewhere. And liberal arts colleges, with our high-touch instructional model, are driven by the need to raise salaries and benefits enough to attract the faculty and staff that can provide the education that students deserve. Now, on top of all that, there's an additional problem of learning. Recent studies have demonstrated that many students never experience deep learning while they're in college. Many students come to campus lacking in academic motivation and gain little of it in 4 years. For many students, the basics of the liberal arts education, such as critical thinking and moral reasoning, scarcely improve. And worse still, those basics seem rarely to lead to the types of applied knowledge that are required for employment in the real world. So, business as usual cannot continue on small residential liberal arts colleges. And if the model is problematic, it's at least partly because it's been inherited from a past that's quite different from our future. In particular, we have an 18th century calendar, a 19th century curriculum, 20th century pedagogy, and it's the 21st century. So what I'd like to do now is spend a little time together imagining what a liberal arts colleges might look like in the future. Let's begin with the calendar. At a certain point, it made very good sense to run our institutions on the 18th century agricultural calendar that dominated the U.S. at its inception, one that had most citizens inside at home during the dark of winter, out in the fields in the summer. And the typical academic year is one result: 2 13-week semesters that I've shown here in orange, and the remainder of the year is off for students or faculty to work or conduct research. Let's begin imagining a fuller use of the year, extending the residential nature of a liberal arts college to 4 10-week semesters, quarters that have a couple weeks between each and maybe a slightly longer break for winter and summer holidays. Let's now imagine that the calendar is not merely aligned with 4 seasons, but with 4 critical domains of knowledge, such as have been put forward by the American Association of Colleges and Universities. Courses within each quarter could be systematically designed to focus first on in-depth study of content, on acquiring and honing skills and research methods that would enable independent learning, on developing the moral and ethical dimensions and effective capacities for study, and then on applying what's been learned to real-world problems, using either the local community or global reach via study away as a laboratory. So what would you get from this kind of fuller use of the year? First of all, if each one of the 3 or 4 courses in the first quarter was linked to a course in the successive quarters, students would have an opportunity to follow each of their individual topics through all 4 domains of knowledge. Second, learning could be highlighted not only as a good in and of itself, but through affect and application would also be seen as personally important and as instrumental in resolving 21st century problems. Third, the calendar would be driven by a coherent theory of education, namely that learning happens best when it crosses boundaries. involving both abstraction of principles and the skilled application of those principles to new situations. And fourth, if a typical bachelor degree right now takes 8 semesters of approximately 13 weeks of class, that's 104 weeks, students could get more time in their studies in a shorter period of time. Just 3 years of 40 weeks would give them 120 weeks of study, and I probably don't need to mention that a degree completed over 3 years might cost less than a degree in 4 years. But even without the very fullest extent of that change, can we imagine supplementing the 2 current semesters with a January term that takes up ethics and a concerted use of the summer to work co-op fashion on application of coursework? Surely there's a wide variety of new and different arrangements of the calendar that are possible and might give us better, more consistent pedagogy as well as more efficient use of our year. Let's turn now to the curriculum. I said before that the current structure is a legacy of the 19th century, and in particular it stands on the shoulders of great European university models that came to supplant earliest American curricula around the end of the 19th century. Earlier American institutions had a single curriculum, usually with a goal such as advancing education. The entire curriculum belonged to the entire faculty, with very little that we would think of as specialization. Our current, more European curriculum, by contrast, has departmental structures that are meant to support very strong disciplinary emphases. The curriculum has at its core now a major, in-depth learning in one of the disciplines, preceded by a few courses to broadly ground students in general education, and if you get done with all of that early enough, supplemented by electives for student choice. All too often in this model, however, general education is a chore to be ticked off as early as possible so that students can get to their major, or even to a second major, or even, at the cost of all electives, to a major and 2 minors. And all of this because we've entered this era of credentialing in which students and their parents and maybe even their prospective employers believe that the credential is the appropriate token of learning. But once again, can we imagine a curriculum that structurally promotes integrated learning? What if general education moved from a checkoff at the beginning to a true career-long partner with the major and elective courses? Perhaps our own impulses to interdisciplinarity might help us craft a large-scale or unified curriculum, one that, for example, intentionally asks students each year to weave connections between the courses that they've taken. And again, even without making the fullest extent of that change, simply by tweaking the current curriculum to make sure that general education, electives, and the major have courses that build in complexity and challenge throughout 4 years, I believe we could attract more and more students very widely. General education reform looms very large for liberal arts colleges because it offers new and vastly richer experiences of sustained and integrated study throughout the 4 years of a degree program. Let's think a little bit about pedagogy. We continue to embrace pedagogies developed in the 20th century. These were and remain overwhelmingly faculty-based, and the pedagogical form of the lecture is one result. Faculty members profess knowledge to a large group of students, and in this model, learning is measured by seeing how well those students can regurgitate the information and maybe earn their check marks. But still, it seems like learning must be about more than repeating the content and acquiring just some disciplinary skills. Better would be pedagogies that were more focused on student learning. And here, students must construct knowledge. They are the ones that are responsible for assembling material in new ways to make meaning not just for the discipline, but for themselves as well. To be sure, faculty members will remain in this picture. Centers for Teaching and Learning, for example, are helping faculty be more intentional about their instruction. Open classroom projects that invite faculty to visit one another's courses are making teaching a much more public act. But still, all too often, even in this more student-centered model, looking after student learning is relegated to the assessment of outcomes, Although now centered on the students, this is really only a more sophisticated version of repeating content and of checking off skills. What I'd like to imagine is a situation beyond the faculty or student-centered models. Imagine that, taking note of the intimate scale of a liberal arts college, we were to teach and craft assignments so as to set students up as communities of problem solvers who together must deal with the politics and economics of real-world vexing questions, to say nothing of sociological and scientific findings, questions of aesthetics and values, or disputes and ethics. In and beyond the classroom, students would have to develop the skills of teamwork by taking problems apart, working on the smaller parts, and then reassembling them and maybe even resolving the underlying problem. This is a very long way from the expert professor that's lecturing in front of a classroom. But I think we can take this even a step farther. Let's go on to imagine that, especially at the upper levels, the faculty re-enter as part of the learning community. Albeit they're more senior and they're more skilled, they too would be inquiring here. This is the next evolution of joint research or of an advanced seminar in which the focus is on ideas from readings or texts or artifacts that were confronted before class and then thought about and experimented upon together. This kind of thinking produces new contexts that demand new activations of the knowledge previously acquired. Right? That's the deep intellectual engagement that is actually the pedagogy of the 21st century. Now, finally, I want to say something about technology in the future of liberal arts colleges. If you open up the pages of the Chronicle of Higher Education or the New York Times, and everywhere you'll find the perception that technology can dramatically reduce the costs of college by collapsing distance and bridging the gap between faculty and students. Massive open online courses are all the rage, but here's the rub. The technological solution that MOOCs offer doesn't match the situation at liberal arts colleges. There's no yawning abyss here between faculty and students. There aren't classes with hundreds and hundreds of students who can't find a way to interact with their instructors. So here, the problem that technology is often thought to resolve simply doesn't exist. But technology is really on the cusp of offering something incredible to liberal arts colleges. And it's not just the replacement of sketchpads with iPads, which changes the relationship between faculty and student when you hand in a painting. And it's not just the addition to the curriculum of ways of understanding huge data sets, especially in the social sciences, but now also in the digital humanities and, of course, in science-based informatics. Instead, I'm thinking of work that was pioneered by Joshua Faust of Portland State University. I'm thinking of an entire suite of software tools that is just about to be made possible. So, here, for example, is a tool to enrich the advising meeting over course selection. Each colored brick represents one department, and if you click on one of them, it can show you a scrolling list of recent graduates and what they're doing post-graduation. This would be a very helpful tool to have when advising a student about the selection of a major. If you click through this to a particular course, the visual catalog is smart enough to show only the courses that the student is eligible for, and clicking on one of them, like 113, might show which general education learning goals the course covers. It could show courses in other departments that are linked by topic and by method. And further, it can show the names and contact information of recent students in the course who might offer their reviews of the course to a prospective student. Now, that slide represents an advising conversation I would be interested in having with any student at Connecticut College. At the very end of the day, I believe that the liberal arts colleges will depend on our ability to reimagine the very bases of our model right up into the 21st century. But where restructuring an industry typically focuses on outsourcing, economies of scale, and cutbacks, reductions in the labor force, for us in higher education, I believe it will require a renewed embrace of certain kinds of underlying principles. Liberal arts colleges offer immersive intellectual experiences And they're built around the intimate scale and built around structural and curricular diversity, built around community shared by disciplinary engagement and by service locally and globally. And in my vision, all of this comes together in a year-round college with an integrated curriculum that creates a sort of educational destination and pedagogy that stimulates deep learning everywhere. In other words, a liberal arts college of the 21st century that would be structured to produce pervasive expectations of excellence and aspirations to significant achievement. Thank you very much.